There's a reason why we talk in the book about agreements rather than rules or anything like that. Agreements happen when you agree on something. And if you don't agree on it anymore, it's no longer an agreement. So it has to be fluid.
Yeah.
Particularly early in a relationship, frequent check-ins about agreements. The first, I was in the relationship prior to the one I'm in with Edward, was a very poly relationship. Edward and I are not particularly actively poly at this point in our lives because we're old and we don't feel like it. But back when I was busy, the first time one of us came home and said, I think I'm falling in love with Lana, whoever it was, we were checking in and reviewing our agreements twice a day for a couple of weeks while we figured out what that meant to us and what needed to be clarified, what kinds of reassurance needed to be dealt, and what new agreements we needed to make with this person having become a more important part of our relation, or our bubble.
So I think that's fundamental for everyone to understand going into poly, is that you're not going to keep the exact same vibe going that you wrote in blood when you were 27 years old.
Yes.
For the rest of your life, because people change, circumstances change, children change the game, new situations show up. So it's important to allow for the fact that things are going to get revisited and things are going to shift and things are going to evolve.
I got a call a little while ago from a very old and dear friend who is in a very long-term relationship that is basically what I would call an open relationship. They're each other's primaries, but they have outside partners. And my friend had broken their safer sex agreement, which that's a big bad thing to do. And I get that. And my friend knew it. But I also found out that they had not re-examined their agreements for upwards of a decade. That's a problem. You can't just float along on agreements that you made at a different place in your life. My friend was starting to feel very restrained by those agreements in a way that didn't feel okay anymore, which is why they breached the agreement. But
that would be almost as crazy as having a nation that's still running off of a constitution that was written 200 years. Oh, wait, no, sorry, I digress.
Yeah. So anyway, I set them off to re-examine their agreements, and I don't know what happened after that. I've been curious, but it feels intrusive to ask. So they're still together. So presumably they worked it out somehow.
Advice, and then you're waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah, being who I am, I don't often get to hear the end of the story. So
yeah, I wanted to take a second to acknowledge, and this is something that we've discussed before. We're two white people discussing polyamory, and polyamory presents itself different and poses different challenges for people of different ethnicities, different groups, depending how marginalized they are and whatnot. And I was going to ask you if at some point do you imagine adding more of in subsequent editions, adding more of, but then again, I'm going to be interviewing, she might even be here in the audience. Evita Sawyers is one of my go-to polyamory voices.
I don't know if you have the newest edition, the magenta colored one, but we did actually ask Ron Neal from Black and Poly to write a sidebar for us because, as you say, we're both extremely white. We didn't feel qualified to write about that ourselves, although we thought it was important to discuss. So there is a sidebar in the newest edition. That specifically about people. One. Yeah, that's the previous one, so it won't be in there. It's in the new
update. Yeah, and Ron is a wonderful voice. Something really funny about Ron, by the way, is I went to him because I wanted to rope him into a conference, and he was like, "I'm not the black guy that talks to white people about this anymore."
I can see how that would be a burnout situation in pretty short order.
Yeah, it can get, and I experience it as a trans woman that speaks to cis people about trans issues. At some point, you're like,
figure it out for yourself, dudes. I'm done.
Exactly. We're gathering some questions. Before we move on to questions from the audience, I want to read to you what you wrote about the rights of the single slut. What you and Dossie wrote back then, and I want to see how it sounds to you now. And you probably haven't heard it in a while. So these are the rights and the responsibilities of the single slut.
One thing I want to clarify is that that is pretty much Dossie's section, because she tends to be a single slut. She's been in only 1 or 2 relationships that were serious ones in the 3 decades we've been collaborators, whereas I tend to pair bond. Even when I say I'm not going to, I always do. So that's my pattern.
Yeah, me
But
too.
yes,
I like to have a witness to my life. It's hard for me to do solely poly. I need to have somebody that I can turn to the left of me and feel somebody walking beside me.
yep, me too.
Yeah.
You know, between each of my long-term relationships, I've had a period of saying never again, and it lasts about 1.5 years, and then I'm back. So, each person has a relationship configuration that feels best to them, and for Dossie, solo seems to be what's consistently best for her.
You know, many years ago, I used to do Christmas seasonal retail, and you work 13 hours a day for 7 days a week, and you make good money. But then in January, you're like, why did I do this to myself? And I will never, ever, ever do this again. And then they call you in October, and you're like, meh.
Yeah, someone's got to pay for the presents. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, but so I think it's that way with relationships too. Our hearts get broken, and then we dive into it again later.
Yep.
But okay, so we're going to dissect Dossie's work here. But so that's what she says. And by the way, I am noting the questions down from the chat. We're gonna get into them in a sec. The rights of the single slut. You have the right to be treated with respect. You are not half a person just because you're single. You have the right to have your feelings heard and respected and responded to. You have the right to ask for anything you want. The person you ask may not have to give it to you, but you're definitely allowed to ask. You have the right to have dates and plans honored, not changed by a third party because the person has seniority. That's something to get into. You
Yeah.
have the right to chicken soup when you're sick and whatever other emergency support you may need. Rights to the emergency room, help when your car breaks down. Your lovers are your friends, and friends help each other when things go wrong. Um, I love that one. You have the right to negotiate family holidays like Thanksgivings and weekends involving your own and your lover's children. You are a member of any family you're in a relationship with. I'm going to read that part again. You're a member of any family you're in a relationship with. How this works may look different depending on the values of the family you're connected to, but you definitely have the right to ask for more than just being somebody's dirty little secret. You have the right to have limits and to set limits, what you will and will not do, what is and is not negotiable for your emotional well being and personal ecology. You have the right to not be blamed for problems in other people's relationships. You have the right to refuse to be a dumping ground for someone's marital woes. You may not want to listen to how much your lover wants a divorce, and you shouldn't have to. And there's just 2 more. You have the right to count. Everybody counts, including you. And you have the right to be valued and welcomed and respected as the wonderful human being that you are. What resonated the most about that all these years later?
Oh boy, you hit one, and now I'm sorry, my brain is not braining very well right now. There was there was one that I thought was perhaps a little sweeping, but now I
Well, there
can't
was the
remember.
family holidays one, and there was the being not being blamed for other for other relationships problems, and then not having to be a dumping ground for all their problems and stuff.
I think that the thing that perhaps that list overlooks is that some people like to be the dirty little secret. The sneaking around is the fun for them. And I would say you have the right to be the dirty little secret if that's what blows your hair back. But I think for most people, the way we put it is probably fine.
There was a funny meme that somebody posted in Smart Sluts recently that said, "There's nothing that you need to be ashamed of about sex, unless being shamed is your kink, in which case you dirty
Yes,
little
exactly that.
whore."
A dear friend of mine, an ex-girlfriend, was in a monogamous marriage for some years, which broke up because her husband was a cheater and she couldn't deal. And so they got divorced, and he remarried and started cheating on his new wife with her. Some people are just addicted to the sneaking, and
Yeah, the chase and
that's
stuff
their
like
kink.
that. And I personally think that's kind of toxic. We're wrapping up, so I'm going to get into the questions from the audience. And one of them is from Sage, and she
Hi,
says,
Sage. Sage is an old and good friend.
"Oh, okay. Well, in that case, no, we're gonna move on." To the point of this part of the discussion, how do we face our fears? Humans have fear that we're going to hear no, or a partner will experience and express unpleasant emotions that feel overwhelming to witness, to listen to, and interact with.
Things never get worse when you take a moment to breathe. That would be my first advice about fears. I am terrified of people's anger. It's very difficult for me to be around an angry person. One of my long-term relationships was with a person who had anger issues, and it was terrific practice. I learned so much about being around anger. I find anger that is not directed at me much easier to handle. Seeing someone being angry with someone else. I actually once did a kink scene where I took a hell of a beating with my permission to the guy. He was very angry about something else. And I said, dump it on me, channel it through me. That's what I'm here for. It was amazing to be at the center of this whirlwind of anger and know that it was nothing to do with me. I just got to feel it like standing outside in a thunderstorm without getting struck by any of the lightning. It was awesome.
I think that the part about anger that usually gets us is the fact that we can feel the hostility being directed at us behind it, which you didn't have in this case.
No, it made it very safe for me, but it also felt very healing to be present around that kind of anger and not take it on.
Something I would add, and let me know how you think about this. I think that if you do have fears about a conversation, about witnessing a lover's anger or negative emotions, feel the fear and do it anyway. I think there was a book at one point. I would say announce, listen, this is something that I'm going in with major trepidation and I'm really afraid of you right now. So I'll listen, I'll hear you out, but please be gentle with
I think often people learn to handle anger very differently depending on where they grew up and how. And often they don't know that you're afraid of them when they're angry. This is often a gendered thing. Men are, as a rule, more accustomed to expressing anger freely, and women are more often taught that an angry man is a thing to be afraid of. And so just letting them know that you're freaking me out. I'm feeling really scared of you right now.
Yeah, and for men, and I lived in that world, for men, anger might be a very commonplace manner of expressing frustration or anxiety.
Exactly so.
Meanwhile, as a woman, we're interpreting it in a very threatening way. So having that language translation, and interestingly enough, men experience some female emotions really threateningly.
Yes.
Like a woman crying could really trigger a man.
Yep, absolutely so. And that's, we talk a lot in the chapter on managing conflict about taking breaks. If someone is getting scared or upset in that way, that's an excellent time to say, I need a break. Safe word. The BDSM concepts of safe words are useful in conflict management, very much.
I'm going to move on to a question from Lazara. She says, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. How does one renegotiate relationship structures after many years together? Say one partner shifts toward a more relationship anarchist frame and the other is still very much in a hierarchical structure. And I've experienced this, and it was very difficult. And part of it was language. Language is everything because you're analyzing every single bit of communication. And my lover, I had very comfortably had the princess tiara of being the primary, and they replaced that with friends with benefits, and I freaked the fuck out.
Yeah.
I didn't want this Burger King hat.
A good place to start with that kind of issue is talking about the semantics. We talked a little bit about this earlier. When I say you're my primary, I may not mean the same thing as you say when you say you're my primary. One of the best questions in the world is, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
That's just a question that comes in handy so very many times, because it could be you don't actually have much difference of opinion. It's just you're using different words, or it could be you really do have a difference of opinion, but now at least
trigger on different words because the words relationship anarchy would have meant something much softer and much more palatable to me than friends with benefits. I particularly have a huge distaste for the expression friends with benefits, because I think that a lot of people use it to describe fuck buddies, which is an entirely different point in the hierarchy of lovers, so to speak.
See, I think friends with benefits is newbies' way of saying fuck buddies when they're scared of saying fuck.
But so how do you renegotiate these relationship structures? And I think that a good thing to do is to do it at a time when you're both feeling comfortable, you're both feeling relaxed, never to go into this after a stressful day at work when the other person's agitated, to say, do you have time to have a deep conversation?
Also, not right after sex or play.
Jesus, no.
And yet, you know, when your boundaries are down, your barriers are down, you're feeling all soft, that's an easy time to get into some really bad shit.
And yeah, that's such a bad habit of some people, of like finding this is like this wonderful oxytocin moment of bonding. And so this is the opportune time to bring up the, the mother-in-law or whatever.
Exactly so. And don't do that. That's my advice on this is don't fucking do that. But the other thing I want to say about negotiating any change in agreements is baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. Talk about what is one tiny step we could make that would bring you closer to what you're envisioning and that I can manage.
Something else that I would recommend is describe the goal and the thing that you're trying to fix, where you're headed with this before you say what it is.
Yes.
If I came up to you and for no reason say, hey, would you drive me to Los Angeles? It would come out of nowhere and it would not be what you expect and you would react to it negatively. But if I said something like, hey, listen, there's this whole thing going on. I'm in the process of moving. My car broke down. My friends aren't available. I'm wondering if you could. And by the time I introduce the question, you've got context.
Yes, you understand context. And there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm in the middle of moving right now, but I will owe you a favor and I hope that you will give me the chance to pay you back someday when you need a favor. Also. Yeah, but that's also true in relationships.
Yeah, but ease people into it. Don't just come up with something like, hey, by the way, so I'm going to be prioritizing some other dick from now on. Just like, FYI. I have a couple more questions.
We have an exercise in the book, I think, it's really, we wrote it for monogamous couples who are entering poly, but it could also be used for couples who are shifting their agreements around poly. You make index cards of all the possible steps between where you are now and where you want to be, and you arrange them with the easy ones in the front and the hard ones in the back, and you just do them one at a time. Never do more than one. That way, if something does go haywire, you know what caused it, and you can fall back and make a new agreement about it. And you're never pushing yourself beyond what feels tolerable to you.
Yeah. Something important is that we tend to understand in our society that conflict means drama and conflict means trauma. And that's not the case. I mean, if two people didn't have any conflict, there would be no growth, there would be no adventure, it would be boring as fuck. The fact that the other person sees the world with different eyes than you is what.
That's why you're with somebody who isn't you. If you only want to see the world through your own eyes, then you need to be single. That's what we learn from the people we love. And the learning makes us closer to them. Or sometimes it doesn't. You learn something that you wish you didn't know, and then there's a whole different problem in front of you, but we're not talking about that now.
Being steeled for the fact that this is part of the human experience really helps. The fact that your expectation of your lover in 2021 should not be the same as the expectation that you had in 2015. I got children, and when we're parents, we really experience the fact that, the kid that I knew 3 years ago is not the kid standing before me now. And you say, but you loved Pokemon, and they roll their eyes and they're like, that was last year.
Yeah. I just have to slip this in. It's utterly irrelevant, but I have to tell everybody I had my first grandchild last week.
Oh.
I'm so stoked. Felix Kyle Tabor. So cute. I don't get to see him because of stupid quarantine, but he's adorable. And thank God for Zoom.
Oh, that's wonderful. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
We're going to move on to a couple more questions because some of us might have a hard stop. I don't. I hope that you don't either, but some of them might start dropping off. Jess said, I think we have to be very careful. Oh, so we covered this, the possibility of gaslighting, and that's a valid point. Megan said, in your opinion, can people be totally monogamous and be really healthy? How could you tell? also unrelated question, do you know how much about do you know much about demisexual and ace people's experiences through polyamory? So the first one, the monogamous thing, one thing that I would like to start this with, and then I'm going to give Janet the floor, is we keep talking about monogamy like it's a static.
Yeah.
Traditional marriage used to be a man and three wives in exchange for, a
Goats.
group of
Yeah.
goats. Yeah. So, all of these things keep evolving, and traditional marriage used to mean, if you look at the Fiddler on the Roof, it would mean that you get to marry the butcher because that's who your father chose for you. And then we invented divorce, and then we invented marrying for love, and marriage has been a moving target. Monogamy has been a moving target. Most people in Argentina, which is where I'm from, when they say monogamy, they mean fucking around behind your wife's back.
Yeah.
Like I had a taxi driver in Argentina tell me that he loves his wife dearly and they've had the most successful marriage for 22 years. And I was like, oh, wow. So what's your secret? And he kind of added a corollary. He's like, well, of course, having a girlfriend helps.
Yep. In answer to the question, I think monogamy is an excellent choice for a great many people. And I think it is possible to be a fully evolved person and be in a happy long-term monogamous relationship. The part I don't like is the feeling that that's the only right way to be. Whether it suits you or not, whether you're happy in it or not, you're just, God damn it, gonna white knuckle it through and not have sex with anybody else because that's what God wants you to do. That I have a problem with. But I think for my first husband, I think is bred in the bone monogamous. I don't think he's ever felt like he wanted to be anything but monogamous. If we had been able to stay together, I think we probably would have segued okay into a mono-poly relationship. We didn't know how at the time, so we didn't. But I think for some people, and particularly for people at particular times of their lives, monogamy is a good choice.
There are aspects of monogamy that could be really boosting for somebody's ego, for somebody's self-worth. And they could also be really toxic, like the idea that I am the sole proprietor and the sole fulfillment center for my partner's happiness needs.
Yes.
And that my partner could not be happy if it wasn't for me. That's a tremendous ego boost. And at the same time, it's a crushing responsibility. So
yes.
It could be too much.
As someone with the tiniest, littlest, barely perceptible codependency issue, yeah, that's a trap I fall into a lot. Making myself responsible for my partner's happiness. I fight against it all the time, and it is still an issue for me and probably always will be.
One thing that surfaced to me as a potential really negative thing in monogamy is that it's a bubble. It forms into a tight bubble, and you don't know what's going on inside of that bubble. And so many relationships deteriorate to having really unhealthy communication patterns, and nobody else witnesses that. Nobody else deconstructs that. And so it goes unchallenged for decades, and it could be really toxic for both individuals. Whereas in polyamory, it sort of leaks out into the polypod, into the larger community, and
that's an interesting thought. I'd have to think about that. I've never not had that thought before.
So in terms of the demisexual folk and the ace folk, I could speak to demisexual experience, but I can't really speak to ace. Do you have any thoughts on the matter?
I sat in once on a panel. I was speaking at a queer sexuality conference for all the Ivy League schools. And because I had time on my hands, I went and sat in on an asexuality panel. And it was striking to me how many of their talking points were exactly the talking points we used in Slut, because what we're saying in Slut is that the romantic / sexual / passionate part of a relationship does not get privileged over other relationships and other connections. Mm-hmm. And I think poly is actually a really good fit for a number of ace and demi people because they are not asking their partners to give up something important to them by virtue of being in a relationship. So the partner can go and get their sexual needs met elsewhere and come home to the ace person with whom they might share a lot of values. They might be domestically compatible. I don't make any secret of the fact that my spouse and I are not non-sexual together and have not been sexual for many, many years. And it's fine. I think in a lot of ways, it's a much easier way to live your life. It's taking one source of friction off the table. And we can relax into the fact that we have similar values around domesticity, politically similar values. We care about the same things. So it just gets easy in a way I think the passionate ones don't. So
Yeah, and
there's,
the unfortunate mistake that allosexual folk make is the fact that we have a tendency to deprioritize non-sexual relationships
yes,
because we see them as lower on the totem pole. We see them as a de-escalation or somewhere because of the fact that we tend to fall into sexual relationships through a
yeah.
series of progressions. And the,
Yeah, I just saw an article within the last week or so, and I know I reposted it on Facebook because I thought it was important, that was about friendships and the importance of friendships in our lives, and why do the romantic relationships get to be more important than the friendships. It had interviews with a lot of people who were in long-term live-in relationships with friends that were not romantic and not sexual, but these were the people that they wanted to share their lives with. The actors Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, who have worked together so often, I once read referring to themselves as heterosexual life partners. And I think that's amazing. I wish there were more of it. I wish there were more recognition of it.
yeah, I like that a lot. Okay, we have a couple more things.
Sure.
So Sage asks, how to challenge religious and cultural religions and cultures that are against and threaten punishment for merely questioning and attempting to critically think about the rules and established norms in which they find themselves. And I have two thoughts immediately. I'm a militant atheist. I'm very angry on this topic. So I'm just going to take a moment myself, and then I'll cede the microphone to you. But first of all, you can't challenge God because God owns the show, and
Yeah.
this is his universe, and you can't defy God. He's in a position of power. So be aware of the fact that you're kind of playing a losing battle if you're actually going up against God. He's got the bigger guns. If you can't have an intellectual debate that doesn't run this kind of absolutist position of like the word of God against you, then you have a little bit more of a chance to have a word in edgewise. I really like to encourage people to start thinking using critical thinking instead of using magical thinking. And especially when I'm speaking to women, I'm saying, hang on a second. Are you talking about the religion where an old white man came down from the skies and impregnated a Middle Eastern teenage girl against her wishes, and then sent an employee to force her to carry to term, and then was a deadbeat dad for 30 years? Is that the religion that you're talking about? Because I think there's a little bit of patriarchy that I detect there.
Um, unless someone asks me for help, I tend to leave them be. If someone is religious and is happy being religious and following the dictates of their spiritual practice, then I don't argue with happy people.
Yeah.
It's working for them. Blessings be. It would not work for me, but
And
that
no,
doesn't
you
matter.
raise a good point. I'm not going to go tell somebody who's been going to AA for 15 years that AA is bullshit. I'm not going to go tell somebody who really, really likes to collect beads that beads are crap. Why yuck somebody's yum and why bring somebody's happiness down? But I think the question that Sage is posing is a situation where we are being attacked from a religious or from a cultural perspective. And I mean, I am attacked not only as a polyamorous person, but my very existence, because I'm a
Yes,
trans,
absolutely.
is in
And
question.
I don't think minds get changed by direct argument ever. I think what any of us who are swimming upstream against some strong cultural currents have to do is be as out as we can safely be, live our lives in as joyous and visible a manner as we can do. And some people will not be able to be out. And I totally get that. And I do not encourage anybody to come out if it's not safe with your work, with your family of origin. But for those of us who can be out, please be out. Please let everybody see that it is possible to be a poly person and be an ethical person, and your kids come out fine, and you mow your lawn on Saturdays like everybody else. There were a lot
You
of
bought
studies.
3 or 4 loans.
Yes. helping your neighbors is a really good way of getting the word out that you're a good person. We live on a street with many elderly neighbors, and we check in with them, send over jam when I make jam,
Yeah.
because that is part of being a good citizen. And if you're a good citizen, then people can see that poly people can be good citizens.
And I like what you say. You're not going to change anybody's mind through direct argument. The way that I change hearts and minds about the transgender experience is I'm cute and bubbly, and I'm fairly non-threatening. And so having a conversation with me is not painful for most people. And having a non-painful conversation makes them feel a little bit, I think, of wiggle room. If they become defensive, then the battle is lost.
Yeah. My version of that is to look and sound like somebody's mother. It's really difficult to get pissed at someone who looks like your mom. And
Okay, so
I
have a
play the
couple more
being
things.
people's mom thing for all it's worth because it works.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, you can't argue with mom. That's why I like Elizabeth Warren so much.
Yeah, exactly so.
Okay, Sage, I think this is the one that I just read. And now we have Jess saying, in the wake of Franklin Vaugh and polyamory's Me Too, how do you think we can and should handle the ongoing problem of abuse within non-monogamy? And by the way, I'd like to say that the critics of Franklin Vaugh have also said that the book is still germane and relevant, and the work is valid. So I'd like to say that. But the point is valid. Let's talk about Me Too, because in the same way that we've acknowledged the fact that polyamory has been a lot of white, it's also been a lot of dude.
Yeah. I think that the single most important factor in preventing or healing abuse in our communities is to have communities. If you are being abused and you don't have anybody to compare notes with or talk to or get information from, it's very difficult to point a finger at the abuse and say, this is not right, I shouldn't be treated like this. If you go out and compare notes with other people who are in relationships like yours and who are not being treated badly, whose partners are respectful and care about them, then it's a lot easier to look at that and say, this is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you feel
Yeah.
like you're the only person in the world who wants what you want, you get desperate. And I saw this when I was coming out into BDSM. I totally saw that. There were several guys, because I was not bi at the time, several guys that I should not have engaged with that I did because I didn't realize there were so very many people in the world who wanted to do what I wanted to do. I thought it was my only chance. And that's what communities are for.
I like that.
The very
Christopher
first
is talking about hierarchical polyamory as becoming increasingly unfashionable within the community. And I've witnessed time and time again in a polyamory group that somebody comes in fresh-eyed and bushy-tailed, and their opening comment is like, "My husband and I are looking for a unicorn," and then they get pummeled with bats, And so it's that thing about the religiosity of the movement that I'm trying to question. Like, okay, so the question's valid, but also,
yeah, no, I utterly hear what you're saying, and yes, it is endemic. When we're personally feeling a little insecure about ourselves, we tend to get defensive and we start virtue signaling because we feel defensive. And I see it a lot in poly communities, the holier than thou, more poly than thou. Relationship anarchy is clearly more evolved than monogamousness or whatever other people might be doing. And no, it's like BDSM people who think it's better to play heavy than to play light, regardless of what actually works for their partner. What works, works. And nobody gets to slam you for doing what works.
Yeah, it's so tricky. There's so many nuances to this because it would be, obviously, we know how the golden rule is, like treat the others the way you like to treat yourself,
Yes.
But if what you like is piss play and you treat everybody by pissing on them, that wouldn't work. And then there's a platinum rule of, treat others the way that others like to be treated. And then there's so many nuances to that because another person might enjoy being a fuck toy and might enjoy a feelings-free dynamic. So it's a lot of conversation. Somebody's asking actually about the power dynamic in poly. And so Stephanie is a submissive. and her partner is exploring with another submissive, and so now we have two subs with one dom. So you might be able to speak to this much better than I could.
Actually, I can't very much because I don't do power relationships. I am
Okay.
a sensation player. I just like to beat people and get beaten. So I'm not into playing with power. I
One thought that immediately surfaces for me is the fact that there are people who, and I struggle with terminology because I'm a lover of language, but some people refer to it as a 24/7 relationship.
uh,
Um, Versus just strictly a bedroom relationship. There's got to be better terminology for this, but
yeah, they're sure, and it's the same sort of kinkier than now that we were just talking about in poly. 24/7 total power exchange is the best, and anything less than that is down a hierarchy of less good.
Yeah, but just starting with that kind of conversation, because if you have a DS relationship, then does that carry over through all aspects of your life, or is it just something that's during play? And so how do you negotiate the boundaries of poly insofar as the other partner? Do you do it from a DS perspective, or do you do it outside of that role play? And that's
I
important.
think that any DS relationship needs timeouts. I
Mhm.
think there has to be a way to talk about concerns outside of the constraints of role,
I love
whether
that. I'm going
that's,
to repeat it because I think that this is a really important point.
yeah.
Any relationship dynamic. Let me see if I'm paraphrasing you right. Any relationship dynamic needs timeouts.
I think we're talking about a different kind of timeout. I think
Mhm.
DS relationships in specific need,
To come out of the bubble and have a discussion, right?
yeah. We need to have a space, and I've seen couples do it where the submissive's job is to keep a journal and to post it where her dom can read it,
Right.
but that's a place that she can express things without fear of
It's
consequence.
like a check-in kind of a thing.
Exactly so. Um, I talked to one couple who had a particular couch in their apartment that was the couch for coming out of roll on. And if one of them went and sat down on the couch, it meant there was something they need to talk
That
about.
is a brilliant idea, to have
Yeah,
a
any kind of,
designated space in the house.
yeah, if you have enough space in your house to do that. A lot of people don't. But anything like that, maybe I interviewed one couple. I was doing an article on cross orientation relationships, and they're a Jewish couple, and they had Seder on Friday nights, of course, and then they would send their son to bed, and then they would have a check-in. That was ritual for them after the Seder and after getting the child to bed. They would check in about things in their lives that needed discussion. So as long as you're setting aside some time that people can talk, and I'm not talking just about the sub. I mean, the dominant has to be able to talk about feeling weak, talk about feeling insecure, talk about not being okay in whatever way. Just as the sub needs to talk about ways in which she might not, let's keep this ungendered, they might not be getting their needs met. They might be feeling like they needed more discipline or less discipline. There has to be a way to talk about that.
And
So I
I
think,
think of analogy. I think in terms of analogies a lot, and so I go places. My mind tends to go places sometimes that seem non sequitur. The one thing that occurred to me is our society is tremendously dismissive of children, and of the
yes,
voice of children, and the rights of children, and the needs of children, and the way that we treat children really needs a revision, and that that reflects on DS dynamics, and it reflects on um, daddy and little dynamics. When I'm thinking about my children at 4, at 5, I treated them with deference, and their voice would be heard. I always cringe at seeing at the subway counter, not subway the train, but subway
the sandwich place, yes.
the sandwich place, to see a mother who's busy talking to another grown up, and the little 4-year-old just pulling and tugging on the pants, saying, "Mom, mom, 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 20 minutes of this." And the mother will not acknowledge another human being saying, "Would you say hello to me?" Because
Yeah,
that's completely unforgivable from any kind of politeness standard.
yeah.
So I think that the way we treat children really matters, or the way that we've been accustomed to treat children, the way that we've been treated as children, really matters when we think of subordinate dynamics in general.
one of the most intense DS relationships I know is a gay male friend of mine and his slave. They've been together for, oh, I don't know, more than a decade anyway. And they're in a very, very strongly power over negotiated 24/7 owner-slave relationship. But I can go up there and visit them, and if I'm not looking for it, I don't see it. Mostly what I see with people like that is they live their lives fairly fluidly with back and forth, and then they read each other's signals to know when it's time to drop into role.
Funny that you use the word signals, because I've really gotten into TikTok lately, and some kinksters are actually talking about their signals and how about this means I want to go. If the sub doing this to them, saying I want to leave now, or saying something like this means I don't want to talk anymore, or something like, for the dom to be able to understand what the sub is signaling, like actual signals. Yeah, we're running tight on time. I think we need to wrap up soon. Somebody mentioned the class Conscious Kink as a really good class.
Okay.
Using the safe word orange, which after the last 4 years, I don't think I'd be able to use. But
I don't know what orange means.
Oh, it's the color of our past president. But
that's it. Got it. Okay, sorry. Yeah, a little slow.
But here it was. I'm sorry. I mean, a really political mind frame lately. But here was just used as a random safe word, some nonsensical word. They're calling a name, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. It's either Shawnee Love or Sini Love as the presenter of Conscious Kink. I don't know that person.
I'm not familiar with them, but I'm not as active in the greater kink community as I once was.
Jonathan, we could keep bullshitting for about 3 hours, but at some point we're going to have to keep going. So let's think in terms of what remains unsaid that's really pertinent to this conversation. I think that we were talking about hierarchies, we talked about jealousy, we talked about I think we've mentioned compersion only once. Maybe we could touch a little bit on that.
Sure. I have two pet peeves about compersion. One is people defining it as the opposite of jealousy, because it isn't. You can feel compersion and feel jealousy at the same time. I do it all the time. So clearly they're not opposites. The other is this sort of gold ring first prize thing for compersion, where if you're really good at poly, you'll feel compersion, and you'll know that you're not really good at poly yet.
Oh, that's so cringy. It's like being a gold star. It's so bad.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, I have had many experiences of compersion, and they're lovely, but they're not essential. You can be a happy, healthy, functional, evolved poly person and not feel it. It's like the female ejaculation of poly. You can have perfectly good orgasms, perfectly good life, and not squirt. And you can have a perfectly wonderful poly life and not feel compersion. So
that should be on a t-shirt. Yeah, absolutely. And it's something good to acknowledge that it could happen and that it's a good thing and it feels good. But
if you're not feeling it, it doesn't make you wrong.
In general, there's something that I experienced as a foreigner looking at America, is the fact that America has the cult of toxic positivity, of aspirational feelings, of like, we should feel this way, rather than like the Danes looking at the world who are like, I don't feel what I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true that we hold up happiness as the grand prize. Everything we do seems to be pointed at creating more of this thing we call happiness.
This potentially could be a good wrapping point, at least for my viewpoint, and then you could wrap up with your thought. There is a thought that at some point I'm going to turn into a full-blown life philosophy that carries me through life and gives me hope and makes me happy. And it goes like this: life is shit. What I mean by that is, I picked up one book once that said you were born to be happy at the airport, and I'm like, no, we weren't.
No,
we were born to struggle. We were born to experience all kinds of difficulties in life, and every now and then, if we're really lucky, we stumble upon this little diamond of happiness, and we're like, holy shit, happiness.
I'm strongly inclined to agree with you. It's
so contentment is a really good one to strive for, you know. But that's this idea of the entitlement of happiness could be really toxic and could really suffocate us. and just coping and doing all right in life is a good normal. And then every now and then you'll be like, wait, hang on, wait, is this happiness? Holy fuck, this is happiness.
Yeah, that sounds about right to
Okay,
me.
so what would be your parting thought?
Oh God. It's always hard for me to generate new thoughts after doing something like this because I've been in reaction mode for an hour and a half.
Yeah, but I mean, you don't have to have one, but I've been throwing questions at you at a rapid fire motion. So I wanted to see if there is something that you've been wanting to say that I just haven't prompted out of you. And if there isn't one, that's fine.
I'm not thinking of anything right off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I should have one written down here at my desk for when I get that question. But so,
Yeah, the
so
basic
right.
thing, something like don't eat the yellow snow or something to end
Yeah. Eggs are cheap,
So,
healthy, and good for you. Keep lots of eggs in your refrigerator and eat eggs. That's my advice.
I love it. Let's see, there's something coming in here from Sage. A large group of people in the USA do gravitate towards binary, concrete thinking to avoid the bad and only to have the good. It seems to reflect the widespread emotional stuntedness perpetuated for several centuries because we haven't evolved to learn more complex thinking and self-soothing skills. There's Sage, there's a really good book. I think it's called Bright-Sided, and it's about toxic positivity. And it talks about the fact how America had this really Lutheran, this kind of grim, stoic kind of a way of looking at the world. And then Walt Whitman and a few others brought forth this idea of positivity and happiness and stuff like that. And they essentially just oversteered.
Well, I will mention, I talk a lot in my writing about ecstatic states and feelings of ecstasy. And Dossie and I did one whole book about radical ecstasy. But if you look up ecstasy in the dictionary, it says a state of being beyond reason or control. You don't hear anything in there about happy, do you?
A state of being beyond reason or control. And see, there's your parting thought. This is a wonderful point to end that.
Okay. All right. Well, let's end it. So thank you all for having me.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.